and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Jenna Boss, and I am a student majoring in Communication and Media Department at Clarkson University. Today we are hosting a conversation about the New York State Women's Equality Agenda. Joining us is New York State Assemblywoman Addie Russell, who serves the 116th River District in St. Lawrence and Jefferson counties. She will discuss the 10 points in the NYS Women's Equality Agenda with Martha Stahl, VP of External Affairs for Planned Parenthood of the North Country, New York, and Donna Seymour, the Public Policy Director for the American Association of University Women of New York State. Take it away, ladies.
Thank you, Jenna. Assemblywoman Russell, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the New York State Women's Equality Agenda that Governor Cuomo introduced in his State of the State address. First of all, let us congratulate you on being named as the chair of the Assembly Task Force on Women's Issue. That platform will give you a great opportunity to lead on women's equity agenda issues and on the many other issues that affect women and their families here in New York State. Can you tell us a little bit about how the task force operates, who the members are, and what your goals are for 2013?
Well, there are 4 members of the committee, including myself as the chair. Members Nolan, Jacobs, and Cook have been longstanding members of the committee, and I anticipate they will continue to serve. Having just been named chair of the task force, I'm kind of at the beginning of the process, but what I hope to do is to raise awareness and to gather information from different parts of the state, likely through meetings, hearings, roundtable discussions. But the governor has laid out a very ambitious agenda of his own during his State of the State. So I expect a large amount of time will be focused on addressing the 10 points that he included. However, I think that there are other areas that we will also focus on, women's health care issues, whether it's a prevention of cancer, and other economic issues. The list isn't exhaustive, but it's a fantastic agenda that the governor has put forth. But we might be able to do some other things on some other issues as well on the task force.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, at a time when many state legislatures and many governors are moving backwards on equality issues for women, New York is taking an aggressive and a very proactive leadership role on women's issues that need to be addressed. Martha, would you get us started with a look at reproductive health care and pregnancy discrimination, which are 2 of the 10 points?
Sure. So New York State has a history of really providing a lot of leadership in the country around issues related to a woman's right and ability to make personal decisions about her health care and about her pregnancies. New York State legalized abortion before Roe v. Wade. It's long set a gold standard for family planning in the country. And part of the Women's Equality Act is the Reproductive Health Act, which would protect a woman's right to make personal medical decisions, to either choose or refuse contraception, or to continue a pregnancy, choose adoption, or to have an abortion if that is her decision, and really supports women in making those decisions. And the other piece I think that's really important to make those decisions applicable in the real world for women is to support women once they are pregnant with whatever it is they decide. So another piece of the Women's Equality Act is to stop pregnancy discrimination once and for all at work. Currently, employers don't have to make reasonable accommodations for pregnant women. So why do you think this is the time to be passing legislation around women's health care and reproductive rights?
Well, there is so much attention being focused in other states in the nation, and I think it's important for New York to play a leadership role on this issue, to restate our progressive stance on women's rights, and to show the other side of the issue. The media is dominated by accounts of measures in other states that are trying to erode women's rights, and I think not only because New York State really we've allowed the federal laws and the Supreme Court cases to override our state laws, but we have arcane laws still on the books in this state. And so we do have work to do in New York to clean up our own set of laws. And now is the time for us to reaffirm our state stance on women's rights and equality issues. And so, that's why the time is right. We neglected to clean up our laws, And at a time when women's rights and equality are under attack, it's time for us as a state to kind of re-up our commitment to women.
Good. If we take as our starting point that what's good for women is good for the economy, and I think we would all agree on that, and there are several key initiatives in the Women's Equality Agenda that really focus on addressing the issues of women's economic, the discrimination they sometimes face in the workplace, and some of the tools that they need in order to address those issues both themselves and as a society. Pay equity clearly leads that list, and there's also some other items that are not on the agenda that I think are just as important, and that includes raising the minimum wage, which the governor has also made a central point of his proposals for this year, and looking at fair pay issues, which the Assembly has tried to address any number of times, and still needs to be cleaned up. I know that just this week the National Employment Law Project released some figures that said raising the minimum wage here in New York from $7.25 to $8.75 would raise the paychecks of 1.5 million low-income workers, many of whom are women who are trying to support their families. It would generate more than $1 billion in new economic consumer spending, which is no small thing, and it would support the creation of up to 7,300 full-time jobs across the state. So that would have a huge benefit for the economy as a whole, as well as for women. And nationally, more than half, 58% of poor children live in female-headed families in 2011, just last year. So one of the reasons those families are poor is because the women who are working in those families don't get fairly compensated. So what do you see happening in the area of pay equity as the agenda moves forward? And do you think that some kind of pay fairness legislation may finally get enacted this year?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you've talked about the increase in the minimum wage as a women's pay equity issue, because it absolutely is. That may be the largest component of the legislation that we passed this year that really impacts women the most, because it's an affirmative action that we would take that women would feel, and men would feel immediately in their pocketbooks. And we know that money is going to be spent almost immediately, because it's going to go for necessities and deferred items that families absolutely need. But some of the other elements that the governor is proposing is to allow even access to the court system when there is wage discrimination. You have to be able to afford an attorney, and the governor is proposing allowing attorneys' fees to be part of an award when someone is successful in court. That's a game changer. An attorney, I think, is more likely to take a case if they believe, they may believe in the case, but they cannot afford to take the case and to absorb all the costs themselves. But there's other things that go on, and that is around the secrecy. I mean, many employers, and sometimes they're the big box stores, they're some of the biggest offenders, where they really they create a work environment of fear. And so there's also an attempt to get at retaliatory action by employers, when people, share information about what their wages are. The big box stores are the ones that are being taken into court because, the finances of the case make it more attractive. But the governor is also looking at those that work for small businesses. And it will also, the governor's proposal will also allow any worker, regardless of the size of the business that they work for, to be able to file these discrimination complaints against. So it's quite ambitious, but we need that. We have seen very little progress over the last several decades in closing the pay equity gap. Even though in this day and age, most people would say, well, how is that still happening? Well, it still is. The governor's also trying to make it financially cost prohibitive, by also increasing the damages that a worker would be entitled to. So,
the carrot and stick approach.
It is. And I get asked, well, how is this going to affect our businesses? Well, I would like to think that it's not going to affect our business practices at all. I would like to think that, especially here in the North Country, that employers are acting very fairly. But what this does is it really provides more of a disincentive for those that may be violating the law and engaging in wage discrimination based on gender.
And of course, we've just seen the reintroduction of the Paycheck Fairness Act at the federal level, and this is the 50th anniversary of the Federal Equal Pay Act, which was first passed in 1963. And frankly, you can drive buses through some of the holes in those two acts simply because some employers, as you point out, particularly the ones with deep pockets and lots of legal help, have found ways around it. So I think personally, my experience is that small business people recognize how critically important good employees are to them, and they do everything they can to treat them right, but some of the bigger employees just treat them as a way to enhance their ability to strip mine assets out of a community by sending it back to the corporate headquarters. So I think that's a very important part of the agenda, and it will have the most positive effect on the economy if we can get it passed.
So one of the things, I mean, we've been just talking about the sort of size of business and how there are loopholes in the existing laws. And one of the things that happens in New York in terms of sexual harassment is that 75% of sexual harassment suits in New York are filed by women. But currently, employers with fewer than 4 employees are exempt. And 60% of private employers in New York State have fewer than 4 employees. So again, I think that's another example of where the size of the employer really can dictate the treatment of the worker.
Exactly. And so while, some businesses, the larger businesses might be doing better in one area, it's really time to once and for all say this applies to everyone. Everybody has to act this way, and provide those remedies, those abilities for women to get justice regardless of where they work.
And one of the things we were talking about with pay equity, I think another piece of the Women's Equality Act, women with kids are less likely to be recommended for promotions or for hire to begin with, and they're offered, as we've talked about, less pay than men who are in similar situations. So men with children will be offered jobs that pay more than women for similar positions. And this really impacts our most vulnerable New Yorkers. 70% of kids who live with single moms are poor or low income.
Right.
So how can we address this? How can we move forward to fix that issue?
Well, that is, the governor has provided for a number of provisions that essentially are, if you're found guilty, you get, more enhanced. He's also working to provide better access, for these problems. So that what he's trying to do is he's not upsetting the apple cart completely. He's taking very measured and reasonable steps to tighten up these loopholes, to create disincentives for bad behavior. And that is, I think, something we can all feel very comfortable in the way that he's trying to address these issues. So I have to, compliment him on really taking, it's obvious that this is a very thorough and well thought out approach to try to, close these loopholes and provide, equity for women.
Addie, one of the areas that the governor had highlighted in his women's equity agenda is the issue of human trafficking.
Yes.
And as we know, that is a very large problem. It's a worldwide problem. It occurs in every state. There are some federal statutes. New York State actually has some of the best of the state laws that deal with that, but there's still some holes that need to be addressed. One of the issues as it relates to women and girls in particular is that sometimes they can be victimized twice. Not only are they trafficked, but then they can be prosecuted for the crimes that they are committing, so-called, under what's they're forced to do during trafficking. So what kind of proposals do you think are going to be looked at in terms of the human trafficking laws and strengthening those?
Well, it's fantastic. The governor has, I think, the right approach on this issue and his agenda. And, what he is saying is stop victimizing women twice. He is going to provide for a defense of prostitution charge that you are being trafficked. You are a victim of a crime, and because you are a victim of that crime, that is a defense to you being charged with another crime. And that, I think, is going to be a game changer. It's instead of treating someone like a criminal and creating a criminal history and a background for someone, I think we're moving toward identifying these victims and getting them out of the situation that they are in and productive members of our society. You know, it's human trafficking is a serious problem. It's one of those things that everyone tries to ignore in our society. And it is a tremendous step forward for the governor, you know, to be making this a priority of his, and for us to be able to turn these victims of crimes into survivors of these crimes and not into criminals.
Is there any attempt at the state level to look at what maybe some other states have done? I know California has a lot of really, really good laws. They're probably even a little further ahead than we are in terms of that. So there's some good state models out there. Is that being looked at as well as a way to address some of these issues?
You know, I think everything is on the table. And the fact that there isn't one, you know, piece of legislation that has been submitted for the legislature to review, I think that provides us the opportunity to bring in some of these other models and to talk about whether this, coupled with, you know, another provision, is maybe a better way to address the situation. But this is certainly a large step forward in terms of how New York has been dealing with human trafficking.
Kind of a related subject is there are victims of domestic violence who sometimes get caught up in the criminal process because the person that they're with has done something criminal. And last year there was a domestic violence survivors act that didn't get very far, unfortunately, so that I think is going to be reintroduced. But again, that's that sort of double victimization. You're in a situation that is not good because of domestic violence, and yet somebody brings in, for example, you know, they rob something, leave the stuff at your house, and then all of a sudden you're the receiver of stolen goods, when again, it's double victimization.
Right, and I think, you know, as a society, we need to understand that domestic violence is a societal issue, and that you can't just push off the problem onto the victim. You know, you can't allow landlords to evict someone who's a victim of domestic violence because she's a victim of domestic violence. Just because there's an altercation that brings, you know, police to the door. A victim of domestic violence should not have to choose between being beaten or calling for help. And the calling for help might mean that she is homeless.
Right.
And that her children are homeless, or him. I mean, it goes both ways, but the vast majority of victims of domestic violence are women. And so, I mean, that's the situation that women are in today. If they are a renter, for instance, that the fact that there is, you know, criminal activity or there's police around is enough to allow for a landlord to evict you. And so we're kind of being complicit and allowing domestic violence to continue by not saying you cannot evict someone because they are the victim of domestic violence. So that's you know, we're talking about, again, not victimizing someone twice.
And I know that the protection of domestic violence victims by strengthening order of protection laws is another one of the 10 points. How can we do that? How can we continue to further strengthen those laws in New York? Well,
we can take advantage of technology that we use all the time in our society. One of the governor's proposals is also to allow video attendance of court proceedings. And, you know, there are just, you know, we hear of horrible stories all the time of domestic violence. And, you know, I think there's a balance that we can strike to allow for victims to be able to participate fully in a proceeding, but not to re-victimize them every time they have to go to court. You know, it has a chilling effect on our criminal justice system, and if we can take care of a matter, you know, the first time it happens, instead of maybe, you know, the case falling apart as it moves through the judicial system because of intimidation and fear, you know, if we can use technology to conduct these types of proceedings and ensure that they are prosecuted the first time, instead of you know, continuing to put people in harm for years and years and years, and burdening our justice system, because we weren't able to take care of it at the first instance. So that's one of the proposals. The governor wants to use technology to be able to have these court proceedings done in a safe manner.
You know, one of the things that the governor's proposal has done is really energized a lot of the organizations in the state who are concerned about many of these issues, children's issues, women's issues, discrimination issues. Over 300 organizations have already come together to work on a coalition to help get this agenda passed. Really what we need now is some legislation to look at. What's the status of actually putting some bills together, and what's the structure of those bills going to look like? Separate bills or maybe a large omnibus?
Well, I think that it's likely it'll be one large bill. The governor has proposed them in one large group, and I think that's probably the best way to go at this type of issue, to ensure that we don't have to lose something that we really feel is important because of time. Sometimes time is our worst enemy when it comes to passing legislation.
And you'll be also working on the budget as well, so that's a big time commitment.
But I will say that a number of these issues have been addressed in legislation before, and particularly in the New York State Assembly. I have taken over the task force from a whole line of very fantastic lawmakers who have been working on these issues for years. So, if you go to the Assembly website, you can go to the committee site, and you can see a lot of the work that has been done on these issues in years past. And there's also ways to access those pieces of legislation from years past on the website. So we're not really reinventing the wheel on a number of these issues. We have been trying to make progress for years. The governor's leadership on these issues is extremely important, as it takes two houses of the legislature to pass the bill. He has been a fantastic leader in regard to other equity issues, and I have all of the confidence that we will be able as the Assembly to work with him and to finally get the Senate to pass these key measures that really have been a long time in the making and are timely, given that there's a national discussion, and New York needs to be on record, and it's time to go on record.
You said earlier that because there's no bill that's to look at, that sort of there's some things that could be on the table that could be added. Are there things that you in particularly think maybe might be missing from this? 10 points is very comprehensive, but what else could we do? Is there more?
Well, the 10 points that have been put together all work very well with each other. But perhaps at the task force level, I will likely be pushing other issues that include education, that talk about the need to expand child care opportunities in this state. I'm very concerned about the stress of the economic downturn that has led a lot of people who have quit smoking or have tried to quit smoking. They've started it back up again. We have been making cuts to the tobacco cessation programs. I know women are certainly part of that group that have taken up smoking, and so there's other issues like that, and of course strategies to reduce the amount of teen pregnancies. So there are a number of other issues. These really look at the pay equity side of things, the workplace discrimination, and protecting personal private health care decisions. But there's a whole host of other areas. But I think this 10-point plan is fantastic, and I'd like to see it passed as a whole. And we'll continue to work on those other issues that will also have other partners involved to see them through.
Addie, in the same way that organizations from all across the state are coming together to advocate for this, is there any movement within the Assembly and the Senate for the women in both of those bodies to come together in some kind of a caucus and also advocate for that? Because that would also be a very powerful voice to make sure this happens. Because we have got women on both sides of the aisle in both houses who, if they work together, would be a great asset.
We do have a bipartisan caucus of both the House and Senate, but there's also a caucus that specifically is bipartisan in both houses and that are all pro-choice. So that entity does exist and has been very active in making sure that we are all on the same page, that we are all coordinating our efforts effectively. And so that, I'm a member of that organization,
Right,
have been
right.
since it was started. And so that group is tremendously helpful in moving forward on these pieces of legislation.
Well,
So-
that's good to see. From a community point of view, what do you think the legislature needs to hear from the groups and individuals in the community about making sure that this becomes a priority and gets passed as a whole agenda?
Well, you know, most people have, everyone has a mother. And many have sisters, and many have daughters. And to think that in this day and age, you know, your daughter and your son who may choose the same career path are going to be treated very differently by their employers ought to just strike a chord in people that find it is just deplorable that in just this day and age that continues to happen. You know, so, you know, it's about communicating to your legislators, you know, how you feel, that you don't feel that your daughter and your son should have different lots in life just because one is a boy and one is a girl. You know, it's really communicating that you support equity and fairness, and that you support equity across the board, that you're not going to pick and choose different elements. You know, this is really a comprehensive approach to try to get at a problem that has plagued our state and our nation too long. And it would be fantastic if members of the community wanted to show their support by contacting their legislature and the governor's office.
Thank you. You have been a real leader on these issues before, and now as the task force chair, it's another opportunity to be a leader, and so we thank you very much for that, and also for making yourself available to speak to us in a way that other people can take advantage of your knowledge and your information, because that is a great role model for other women who want to get into legislative bodies and do this kind of work, but also just in terms of how you communicate to your constituents. It's very refreshing to have someone so accessible, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I guess that's going to wrap us up. Thank you guys for coming. These WCKN Conversations are a production of North Country Matters, produced in the studios of WCKN on the campus of Clarkson University. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and the mass media and communication students here at Clarkson University. Thank you.